When Jasmine Crockett calmly walked through a sequence of official documents exposing political wrongdoing, Karoline Leavitt lost her composure and called the police. What followed became a nationwide turning point. It wasn't intended to cause a stir. Just a regular Thursday night segment on government accountability, live from a studio in Arlington, Texas. For lawmakers and one moderator, nothing unusual. Jasmine had only been added to the lineup after another congresswoman backed out. She hadn't written a speech, just came prepared with her usual folders, color-coded tabs, and a razor-sharp memory. The studio lights gave off a low hum overhead. The moderator, Paul Linfield, a soft-spoken man in a gray suit known for cutting off female guests more than male ones, gave a standard intro. "Let's aim for a passionate but civil discussion tonight," he said with a polite smile, scanning the panel. Jasmine didn't need the reminder. She adjusted her microphone, glanced at her notes, and looked straight at the camera with her steady, unmistakable voice. Transparency isn't a catchphrase. It's a responsibility. It's a promise between the state and its citizens. Karoline Leavitt, seated 2 spots away, allowed a sharp breath, loud enough for the mic to catch. C-SPAN wasn't built for theatrics, but tonight felt different. Jasmine had come armed with facts, a thin folder packed with dates, names, and censored memos, all publicly available in government records, but rarely covered by the media. As she began citing them, her voice stayed even, deliberate, and clear. On March 12th, she said, an internal note from the Presidential Scheduling Office records a private meeting with 3 unnamed energy executives, none of whom appear in the White House visitor registry. That meeting happened just before a rollback on federal environmental penalties. Karoline's shoulders stiffened. "Are you accusing the White House of misconduct?" she asked, her forced composure already slipping. Jasmine didn't turn her head. "I'm quoting official records, Karoline." The moderator quickly interjected, attempting to cool things down. "Congresswoman Crockett, just to be clear, are you making that claim?" "I'm saying the facts are clear on their own." The camera caught Karoline's hand flinch as she reached for her pen, only to close her fingers into a fist. She wasn't used to losing control of the narrative, but Jasmine hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made any direct accusations. She was simply presenting one detail after another, and it was landing. Jasmine pulled out a second document, a timeline showing clear links between policy changes and political contributions. Her tone shifted just enough to signal to the audience that this wasn't theory. This was evidence, precise, deliberate, the kind of trail a seasoned attorney leaves when they want something to stick. Karoline broke in. "You're playing a dangerous game." That was the first time Jasmine looked her way. "I'm just stating facts. If the truth causes damage, maybe that damage was overdue." The control room switched to a wide camera angle. Silence hung for nearly 5 seconds. Long enough for viewers across the country to edge closer to their screens. "Paul," the moderator, cleared his throat. "We'll be right back after this break." The broadcast faded out. Inside the studio, tension exploded. Karoline spun toward Jasmine the second the cameras dropped. "You think this is some performance? You just aired sensitive material on live television. That's illegal." Jasmine didn't even blink. "Nothing I shared was classified. If you don't believe me, check the Federal Register." Karoline stood up so abruptly that her earpiece dropped to the floor. "You'll regret this." Producers rushed in to keep the situation from escalating. 2 interns scrambled to collect the documents Jasmine had laid out across the table. One assistant, visibly shaken, asked if she wanted her papers returned. Jasmine shook her head calmly. "No, let them read it." Karoline stormed toward the exit, already on a call. Her voice was sharp, carrying across the hallway. "Capitol Police? I need to report a national security breach." Even the studio's alert tones went silent. Jasmine didn't move. She simply watched Karoline disappear through the door. Her voice didn't waver when she spoke. "So this is what telling the truth gets you now." But it was Karoline's next move that would send everything spiraling. At home, millions of viewers had no clue what had just erupted off-screen. The broadcast had cut suddenly to a commercial. No sign-off, no context, just the show's logo flashing on screen, followed by an overly upbeat tired jingle that clashed hard with the moment that had just unfolded. Inside the Arlington studio, everything had shifted. Staff were visibly shaken. The director's headset buzzed with frantic instructions. Legal was already on the line with the network's compliance team. Jasmine, meanwhile, remained in her chair. She leaned back slightly, expression unreadable, her mind racing through the fallout. She knew Karoline had gone too far. What she didn't yet realize was that Karoline's actions had just escalated this far beyond one evening's broadcast. Down the hall, Karoline's voice echoed louder. "I'm not being dramatic." She revealed information that poses a risk to national security. Karoline's voice was sharp over the phone. "I don't care if it was technically available." She drew connections that were never meant to be made. On the other end, the Capitol Police dispatcher kept asking her to specify which law had been violated. Karoline had no clear answer. She repeated vague phrases like reckless disclosure and irresponsible use of public information. Back in the studio, moderator Paul looked like the color had drained from his face. He leaned toward a nearby crew member and murmured, "She just made it 10 times worse." Jasmine rose from her seat, slow and deliberate, breaking the tense quiet in the room. She turned to the production staff. "Can someone get my chief of staff on the phone? He'll want to be briefed immediately." An intern nodded and quickly disappeared down the hallway. 10 minutes later, Karoline re-entered the studio, holding her phone tightly, like it proved something. Her cheeks were flushed, her voice bitter. "You're going to regret ever opening your mouth tonight." Jasmine turned to face her, steady as ever. "And you're going to regret trying to use law enforcement to silence public information." Paul quickly stepped in, hoping to defuse the moment. "Ladies, please, let's keep this professional. We still have 20 minutes left in the program." Jasmine raised a single brow. "You expect me to go back on air with someone who just tried to criminalize me for quoting public records?" That froze the room. No one spoke. Then the producer stepped forward, Alondre Greer, known around the building for her no-nonsense attitude. "We're cutting the rest of the show. We can't afford another blow-up. The phones haven't stopped." Producer Alondre Greer turned toward Jasmine. "We'll have someone walk you to your car, just in case." Jasmine let out a quiet laugh, not from humor, but from bitter recognition. "Tell me, am I the threat here, or is she?" Alondre didn't respond. Jasmine began collecting her documents when her phone buzzed. It was her chief of staff, Nal Reyes. He was already in the loop. Capitol Police were following up, making standard inquiries in response to Karoline's complaint. Jasmine would likely need to submit a formal response within the next 2 days. "I didn't say anything that isn't already publicly documented," Jasmine told him. "They can dig through the records themselves. It's all there." Nal's voice was steady but tense. "That might not matter. They're not going to care that you followed procedure. They'll care that you embarrassed the wrong people." Outside, the night air clung heavy and warm. A small cluster of journalists had gathered near the parking area. Word was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. A young reporter from the local ABC station was already live streaming from his phone. "We're still waiting for confirmation on what exactly was said on air that led to the segments." Jasmine didn't stop to speak with reporters. She headed straight for the car, slid into the back seat, and closed the door behind her without a word. Her phone buzzed again. Nal texting, "We need to get in front of this before the narrative gets hijacked." She responded, "Too late." It already has. The car eased out of the lot. Behind her, the glow of the studio lights faded in the rear view, still shining through the tinted glass. Somewhere inside, Karoline was probably pacing, writing out a press release, maybe even lining up appearances on morning shows. Jasmine didn't feel rage, not yet. She was analyzing, measuring angles. If they were planning to force her into a defensive corner, they'd have to pray no cameras were rolling. But it was already out of their hands. Just 37 minutes later, the footage was everywhere. A freelance producer who'd been quietly screen recording the raw studio feed on her laptop had saved it before the network could scrub it. The clip captured it all. The moment Jasmine calmly cited the meeting memo with unidentified energy executives, Karoline's face contorting in real time, the sharp accusation about classified lies, the sudden escalation, and finally, the feed cutting to black. It landed on Twitter first, then TikTok, then rolled into the evening cable news cycle, with some transcripts blurred out for legal reasons. But the impact couldn't be undone. The questions were out, and the public wasn't waiting for permission to start asking them. Why had the broadcast cut to commercial with no warning? What exactly had Jasmine said? And more confusing, why was Karoline calling law enforcement? By midnight, the hashtag she just read, it was trending everywhere. But while the internet spiraled into memes and speculation, things in Washington were far less amusing. The Capitol Police had, in fact, responded not with arrests or urgency, but with an official inquiry. Around 11:45 p.m., Jasmine's office received a call asking whether she'd be willing to sit for a voluntary interview regarding comments made during a nationally televised program. Jasmine wasn't shaken. She'd faced worse before. That didn't mean she wasn't furious. Her chief of staff, Nall, had the call on speaker as he paced across her apartment floor. It's standard protocol, he said. If someone files a complaint, especially someone with Leavitt's connections, they have to check the boxes. She used terms like national security threat. That triggers all the bells. Jasmine sat calmly on the couch, laptop open, playing the clip again. And again. All I did was quote from official congressional filings. I didn't spin it. I didn't even summarize. I read them word for word. Nall sighed. Doesn't matter. They're either trying to rattle you or make you the cautionary tale. Either way, you've just been marked. Her phone buzzed again. Another media request. This one from MSNBC. She turned it down. Then another. CNN called. She declined again. The truth was, Jasmine wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. Not until she understood exactly what Karoline's angle was. Karoline, meanwhile, had already gone public. Her statement was sweeping, emotional, and heavy on alarmist language. She accused Jasmine of betraying public confidence by referencing materials that, while technically accessible, lacked full context and posed a threat to the integrity of the executive branch. No evidence, just a storm of loaded phrases meant to stoke panic. What Karoline hadn't counted on, though, was the number of reporters who still believed in vetting claims before printing them. By dawn, two respected political journalists, Allison Baird of Politico and Marcus Lynn from Reuters, had published a thorough breakdown of every point Jasmine had raised on air. Side-by-side comparisons showed Jasmine's quotes alongside the official documents they came from, complete with page numbers, source links, and the public release dates. Nothing was leaked. Nothing had been redacted. Nothing was secret. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't explosive, but it was rock solid. And this time, the truth was enough. Nall had already forwarded the fact-check threads to every major news outlet. Let them see for themselves. Every word she said came directly from verified sources, he texted. Jasmine's reply was a single word. Waiting. She still hadn't gone public. No tweets. No statements to the media. Not even a briefing to her colleagues. But she was watching. Online, the reaction had shifted from defense to investigation. Viewers weren't just standing with her. They were treating the broadcast like it was part of a legal case. One TikTok creator slowed down the footage, frame by frame, zeroing in on Karoline's expression. This, he said, is the exact second someone realizes the truth hits harder than spin. The internet ate it up. By late morning, even voices on the right started to waver. Senator Glenn Royan from Indiana posted, "You don't have to agree with Representative Crockett to recognize that using law enforcement as a weapon against a sitting member of Congress is a dangerous road." His post hit over 100,000 likes in under 2 hours. Meanwhile, Karoline's side was growing quieter. She appeared on a conservative podcast, doubling down on her stance. This wasn't about documents. It was about motive, she said. She pieced together unrelated information to make it look like corruption. The host nodded, replying, "Well, you know how they operate." But Jasmine's silence had started speaking louder than Karoline's spin. By the time she arrived at her Capitol Hill office around noon, the press had already formed a wall outside. Cameras clicked. Questions flew. She walked straight through without acknowledging a word. Inside, Nall handed her a folder. Preliminary report from legal. Their advice? Hit back. Hard. Jasmine took the folder, didn't open it. She walked to the window instead, watching the tangle of cameras and boom mics outside. Then, calmly, she said she thought I'd fold, break down, apologize, maybe even cry. Nall didn't interrupt. He just watched her, knowing the next move was hers, and whatever it was, it wouldn't be quiet. But you're not going to, are you? Jasmine turned and gave Nall a steady look. I grew up in South Dallas, she said. I've faced things far worse than a media meltdown and a panicked white woman calling the police. If Karoline thought this would all blow over by morning, she was about to find out how wrong she was. The day after the broadcast, the story had already grown teeth. Outside Jasmine Crockett's office on Capitol Hill, the sidewalk was packed, not with the usual press corps shuffling for sound bites, but with full crews, boom mics lifted, live feeds rolling. This wasn't just politics. This was a flashpoint. Karoline's decision to involve Capitol Police during a primetime broadcast had done more than stir controversy. It had triggered something deeper. But inside the building, everything was quieter, controlled, tactical. Jasmine was seated in a closed-door meeting with her legal team and 3 senior advisors, including Nall, who looked like he hadn't slept since the lights went out in the studio. His tie was askew, his eyes bloodshot, and he hadn't touched the coffee in front of him. Across from him sat Sad Milton, her legal counsel, a sharp mind with a calm demeanor, and someone Jasmine had trusted since their Howard Law days. I need to know exactly what you said on air and what you physically showed, Sad said, flipping open a legal pad. Jasmine calmly opened her folder and began laying out documents one by one. This is the FOIA response from 2021, she said, tapping the first. This is the committee summary entered into the congressional record. She moved to the next. This one's from a public oversight session held last March. And this, she held up a crisp sheet of government letterhead, came directly from the Office of Government Ethics website. Sad scanned the pages, then nodded. So every single piece was public. Every word, Jasmine said. Then we're solid, Nall added, his voice finally steadying. The Capitol Police haven't clarified you're not under investigation because they're stalling. Jasmine shook her head. They're not stalling. They're watching, waiting to see which way the wind shifts before they say anything. And the wind was shifting fast. By late morning, the media wasn't talking about security threats anymore. The conversation had pivoted. Now it was about overreach. A member of Congress reported to the police for reading from public records. The irony didn't need a headline writer. It spoke for itself. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice stepped into the debate. Congressman Will Granger of Kansas, a Republican known more for his silence than his stances, appeared on NPR. Look, he said, I don't agree with Representative Crockett's politics. But calling law enforcement on someone for reading public documents? That's not democracy. That's distraction. The quote made national news, not because it was explosive, but because it came from someone squarely in the middle. Back in Jasmine's office, she still hadn't made a public statement. But behind closed doors, she was charting her next move. We can't just play defense anymore, she said, pacing the room. We need to connect this to a pattern. Show that this isn't new. That silencing through fear is a tactic used over and over. Sad raised an eyebrow. So you're going wider? No, Jasmine replied. I'm going deeper, because this wasn't just about Karoline anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been dismissed, criticized, or accused of being too intense, too emotional, or too radical, simply for speaking truth others didn't want to hear. And while Jasmine was sharpening her message, Karoline was starting to unravel. Her second public statement, released that afternoon, lacked the polish of the first. In her second statement, Karoline claimed she had acted out of an abundance of caution and was simply following standard protocol when she reached out to authorities. But no one was buying it. Pressed by reporters, the Capitol Police finally issued a short, carefully worded release. At this time, no criminal investigation has been initiated involving Representative Crockett. The language was deliberate, but even their decision not to escalate sent a message, loud and clear. Still, the story wasn't fading. What changed everything was a single moment. Retired Colonel Richard Ames, a former intelligence officer, appeared on a CBS political panel. His words were blunt. Nothing Representative Crockett cited was even close to being classified, he said. In fact, more Americans should be aware of the information she referenced. What concerns me isn't what she said. It's that someone tried to treat government transparency as a crime. That clip exploded. Over 4 million views in 6 hours. Inside Jasmine's office, the energy shifted. The same aides who'd sat in stunned silence the night before were now moving with purpose. Phones were ringing with messages of support from across the country. Staffers took down quotes from constituents, allies, even a few skeptical moderates. I don't always agree with her politics, but on this, she's dead right. What had started as a storm now looked more like momentum. Amari shook her head slowly, not in disbelief at the documents themselves, but at the sheer boldness it took to read them aloud, unflinching, in front of a national audience. "You realize what you did, right?" she said. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Remind me. You put the receipts where everyone could see them. That wasn't a mic drop. That was a data dump." And Karoline panicked because she knew you weren't bluffing. Jasmine allowed a small smile. "That's what I hoped you'd say." They stayed huddled in that office until nearly 2 a.m., cross-referencing timelines, pulling archived committee reports, piecing together a broader pattern Jasmine had started to uncover, one that went beyond just Karoline. "This isn't just a cover-up," Amari said, her pen scribbling furiously. "This looks like a coordinated effort to bury regulatory memos tied to specific campaign donors." Jasmine nodded, and Karoline's reaction gave it away. By the time Amari left the building, she had what she needed, not just a story but a roadmap. Jasmine didn't ask how soon it would run. She didn't have to. She knew Amari well enough to understand she wouldn't release a word until every citation was airtight. Back at her desk, Jasmine opened the draft statement and read it one more time. Clear, precise, unflinching. She deleted the last line and typed something new. Transparency should never feel like a threat. Unless, of course, you have something to hide. Then she clicked save. By morning, both stories, hers and Amari's, will begin to spread. And this time, Jasmine wasn't the one under the microscope. She was holding the light, pausing at each document, asking questions, annotating margins like it was a Supreme Court decision. "This," the teacher said in the video, gesturing to her screen, "is how democracy defends itself. Not with slogans, with evidence." The clip racked up over 800,000 views in a day. Cable networks, who had initially tread carefully, were now citing Amari's article on air. Anchors read excerpts aloud. Cheerings began to shift tone. Jasmine Crockett spoke from the record. So why was she silenced? Facts, not fear. A journalist breaks down the broadcast that shook D.C. Karoline, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Her team released no third statement. No press hits. No counter-article. Just silence. And the quiet retreat of allies who suddenly had other priorities. But inside Capitol Hill, things were moving fast. 2 oversight committees, one led by Democrats, one by Republicans uneasy with the optics, announced preliminary reviews into the energy exec's memo Jasmine had cited. Questions were now being asked not about her conduct, but about the companies and contracts behind the documents. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't tweet. Instead, she sent a single text to Amari. "You started something?" Amari replied, "Oh no, you did. I just handed them the flashlight." That evening, Null stood in Jasmine's doorway holding 2 coffees. "You ready to say something publicly now?" he asked. Jasmine took the cup, nodding. "Let's write it. Not to defend myself, to defend the right to know." This time, the statement wouldn't be about putting out fires. It would be about lighting one. And that word, martyr, stuck. Not because Jasmine Crockett had claimed it. She hadn't. Not once had she called herself a victim. But the idea that someone could be villainized for simply reading from public records on live television had hit a nerve far beyond party lines. By the next morning, editorial headlines across the spectrum were echoing the same theme. The Hill, transparency isn't treason. USA Today, when telling the truth is treated like a crime. The Atlantic, Jasmine Crockett didn't shout. She showed receipts. Fox Digital, Who's really threatened by the facts? Behind closed doors, Karoline Leavitt's donors began making calls. Not angry ones, cautious ones. One major PAC quietly pulled a fundraising event scheduled for the following week. A lobbyist was overheard saying, "We don't touch live wires," and this one's sparking. Inside Jasmine's office, things remained focused, almost calm. The team was busier than ever, not with damage control, but with opportunity. Emails flooded in, from journalists, educators, advocacy groups, even a few former staffers from other representatives who admitted they'd never realized just how public those records really were. Amari's article had become a kind of digital syllabus. People weren't just defending Jasmine. They were learning because of her. That scared some, inspired others. At noon, Jasmine met with a group of civil rights leaders behind closed doors. Afterward, one attendee told a reporter, "She didn't ask for support. She asked how we could use this moment to teach people what's really hidden in plain sight." And by the week's end, it was no longer just a media cycle. It was a movement. She never raised her voice, one White House aide muttered, scrolling through clips on his tablet. And somehow, it's louder than anything we've said all week. There was silence in the room, not confusion, but the kind of stillness that follows the realization that a strategy has failed. The press team had tried calling her reckless, tried invoking national security, even flirted with painting her as a fringe radical. But none of it stuck, because Jasmine hadn't reacted. She hadn't taken the bait. She had simply shown the truth and let everyone else argue over it. And people weren't arguing the way they usually did. They were listening. "Do we pivot?" someone asked. "Ignore it? Blame the network?" "No," said another aide, rubbing his temples. "We contain it. Quietly. No more statements. No more fuel. Let it die." But it wasn't dying. It was evolving. In D.C., more members of Congress, including a few who rarely spoke publicly, had begun referencing Jasmine's moment. Some echoed her language. Others began digging into the same oversight records she'd used on air, realizing how much had been sitting in plain sight. A whisper began traveling through Capitol Hill. She didn't leak anything, so why were they so afraid of it? Meanwhile, out of view of cameras and press briefings, Karoline Leavitt was facing a growing wall of closed doors. Allies were suddenly unavailable. Press outlets stopped returning her comms team's emails. Her inner circle was shrinking. And Jasmine? Jasmine was back in committee Monday morning with her binder of documents, sleeves rolled up, asking quiet, piercing questions, this time with twice as many people watching. Because silence, when earned, doesn't signal retreat. It signals readiness. Jasmine laughed when she read the text from Nall. She was sitting on a folding chair backstage, sipping lukewarm coffee and wiping the sweat from her palms with a napkin. The community center didn't have air conditioning, but it didn't matter. People had stayed. They'd listened. They'd clapped. Not for drama, not for applause lines, but for clarity. She texted back, "We're not printing banners. We're building habits." Because that was the shift. It wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't even about Karoline. It was about attention, about asking people not just to react, but to read. Jasmine didn't want to be a hero. She wanted people to pick up the documents themselves and realize this was always there. And they were. Librarians were seeing an uptick in FOIA questions. Downloads from the Office of Government Ethics tripled. A civics teacher in Michigan started a receipt club where students brought in government records and explained them to their classmates. The story hadn't gone away. It had decentralized. Back in Washington, the political class had a new problem. Jasmine Crockett had not only weathered the storm, she had made the public curious. And that, in D.C., was more dangerous than any protest. Curiosity couldn't be spun. It couldn't be shut down with a press release. And Karoline? Karoline was now the one dodging cameras. Her third statement, released the following Tuesday, attempted to pivot to respect for institutional norms. But the damage was done. She had turned a televised disagreement into a national reckoning and lost control of the narrative in the process. Because Jasmine Crockett hadn't yelled. She had asked a better question. And the country, at long last, had started asking it too. The contrast was jarring. On one side, Jasmine Crockett, composed, and methodical, calmly citing public documents, pointing to dates, sources, and official releases. On the other, President Trump, seated at the resolute desk, speaking in vague generalities, warning of dishonest people and division, but offering no specifics, no counter-evidence, just tone. The side-by-side clip went viral within hours. One tweet read, "She brought footnotes. He brought feelings." Another said, "Imagine being so threatened by a woman reading in public that you hold a whole press briefing." Even more damning were the response videos. Professors, journalists, and even a few former intelligence officials began doing frame-by-frame breakdowns of Jasmine's original appearance. They weren't just defending her. They were teaching through her. It became clear this wasn't just about what she said. It was about how she said it. And Trump's vague response, instead of shutting things down, only fanned the fire. He hadn't denied a single claim. He hadn't refuted a single document. All he'd done was confirm, indirectly, how rattled the administration really was. Back in Jasmine's office, staffers watched the press briefing in silence. When it ended, no one spoke for a moment. Then Null broke the silence. He blinked. Jasmine didn't smile. He should have read the documents. The Crockett effect, once a running joke among her interns, had become something bigger. It was no longer about her personality, her performance, or even the politics. It was about precision. It was about giving people the tools to see through spin. And it was working. This wasn't a media cycle anymore. It was a movement. There was a hum of low conversation, the rustle of press notes, the glow of standby lights on cameras. Then the door opened. Jasmine Crockett walked in alone. No entourage, no security detail at her side. Just her navy blue jacket, a slim folder in hand, and a look that said she wasn't there to perform. She was there to finish what she started. She stepped up to the mic, glanced once around the room, then opened the folder. "I want to start by saying something simple," she said. Her voice was steady, clear. "I didn't come here today to escalate anything. I came here to clarify everything." Click. Cameras flashed. But Jasmine didn't blink. There's been a lot of noise these past few days. Accusations, press statements, headlines with more heat than light. But here's what hasn't changed. Every word I spoke on that broadcast came from public documents. Every citation, every date, every line. Not leaked, not stolen, not secret. Public. She paused, letting the silence settle. And if reading the truth out loud makes you a threat, then we have bigger problems than a press briefing. The audience was still. You could hear pins stop moving. I have no interest in political theater. I have no time for distraction. I have a job to do. And the people who elected me, the people I answer to, expect me to do it with honesty, integrity, and courage. She closed the folder. Because here's the truth. I'm not afraid of being challenged. I'm afraid of people giving up on the idea that facts still matter. That transparency still matters. That this country can still be a place where speaking truth doesn't make you a target. The final sentence cut like a scalpel. "I will not apologize for telling the truth." She stepped back from the mic. For a beat, there was silence. Then, thunderous applause. Not from the reporters, but from the citizens standing in the back, local volunteers, retired teachers, community organizers who had shown up quietly and filled the last row. And when the cameras cut to broadcast, millions more were watching. No shouting, no spectacle, just clarity, composure, and conviction. And across the country, people began to ask, if telling the truth rattles the powerful this much, maybe we should all start reading a little louder. Jasmine let the weight of her words settle over the room. No one moved. Even the sound techs stopped fiddling with their gear. She took one step forward, soft but certain. And if the truth being inconvenient is now grounds for intimidation, then we're no longer debating policy. We're debating democracy itself. That landed. She looked directly into the cameras. I won't be bullied back into silence. I won't be painted as a danger for reading what's already written. And I certainly won't allow anyone, no matter their title, to redefine transparency as treason. A murmur ran through the back rows. Not the chaos of a scandal, but the electricity of a shift. A moment people would remember. "I'm not the story," Jasmine said. What I said isn't the threat. The real threat is how quickly those in power try to criminalize clarity. She stepped back from the microphone and paused. Then, she said, even more quietly, "Let that be the part you don't edit out." And she walked off the stage. No press huddle, no Q&A, just a clean exit and a message impossible to twist. Later that evening, as clips of the speech spread across the internet, a trending phrase began to surface. 3 words that captured it all. Truth isn't treason. Jasmine Crockett had just redefined what political courage looks like. The moment her final line echoed through that packed civic center, a new headline practically wrote itself. If truth scares you, maybe you're the problem. That clip hit every major network within the hour. News anchors replayed it. Podcasters dissected it. Educators taught it. And people across the political spectrum, some reluctant, some electrified, couldn't stop watching. Because Jasmine hadn't just defended herself. She'd drawn a line in the sand. And she did it without yelling, without spectacle, without spin. Just facts, clarity, and a steel spine. By the next morning, hashtags were trending. Hashtag truth is not treason. Hashtag receipts don't lie. Hashtag Crockett effect. Even those who dismissed her before were now quoting her. A well-known historian tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett didn't go viral. She went constitutional." In the coming days, think pieces would try to frame it. Was this the start of a movement? A reckoning? A fluke? But Jasmine had already answered that. She wasn't there to be a character. She was there to keep receipts and make damn sure no one shredded them quietly. But what none of them could deny was this. Jasmine hadn't changed her story. She hadn't backtracked, and she hadn't disappeared. While others rushed to shape the narrative, Jasmine stayed focused on the facts. Every time they tried to twist her words, she pointed people back to the documents. Every time they tried to paint her as radical, she showed up calm, composed, and precise. By noon, several independent watchdog groups issued statements defending her. One read, "Transparency isn't a threat. It's a requirement. If reading public documents aloud is dangerous, then democracy is already in trouble." The noise around her was growing, louder, messier, more polarized. But Jasmine understood something that many in D.C. had forgotten. You don't have to out-yell a lie. You just have to outlast it. And she was prepared to do exactly that. Because while the headlines focused on confrontation, Jasmine was focused on construction. Not of a campaign, not of a brand, but of a blueprint. For accountability, for clarity, for the kind of leadership that doesn't vanish when the cameras turn off. They tried to turn truth into danger. She turned it into direction. And that was only the beginning. Eyes steady on the memo. Her voice was quiet but unwavering. This isn't vindication. It's confirmation. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Because Jasmine Crockett hadn't set out to win a media war. She'd set out to hold a mirror to power. And now, that mirror was cracking. By 7 p.m., hashtag reputational threat was trending on every major platform. Not as an insult, but as a rallying cry. Students printed the phrase on T-shirts. Advocacy groups turned it into a campaign slogan. One protester in Chicago held up a cardboard sign that simply read, "If the truth is a threat, what are you hiding?" Inside the West Wing, things were unraveling. What had started as an attempt to discredit one Congresswoman was quickly becoming a case study in how suppression backfires. And through it all, Jasmine stayed on message. No backpedaling, no spin, just an unflinching commitment to transparency. That night, a clip from one of her town halls resurfaced. The moment where she'd said, "If we all start reading what's already out there, we'll stop believing the people who tell us it's too complicated to understand." Now, that quote wasn't just viral. It was foundational. But even that statement felt deflated. No follow-up, no press briefing, no interviews. Just 7 words trying to hold a crumbling wall in place. In contrast, Jasmine's video hit like a jolt. No theatrics, just truth, plainly spoken. It wasn't meant to go viral, but it did. Because people were hungry for plain talk in a season of spin. Comment sections lit up with words like, "Finally, someone said it. I didn't even know who she was a week ago. I do now. If reading public records is dangerous, we're already in trouble." By sunrise, 3 more representatives, 2 Democrats, and 1 independent, issued public statements defending Jasmine's right to speak. One even attached the same memo the White House had hoped no one would see. Meanwhile, journalists who had previously tiptoed around the controversy began using stronger language. Overreach, smear campaign, political panic. Karoline's silence was being interpreted not as caution, but as retreat. And Jasmine? She went to work like it was any other day, walking into a morning committee meeting with a stack of bills under her arm and a quiet nod to reporters who trailed behind. "You coming for the fireworks?" one whispered to another. "Nah," the other replied. "I think we already saw them." By Friday, the numbers were undeniable. Over 19,000 messages, calls, emails, handwritten letters, even a few faxes. Some from big cities, others from rural towns no one on her team could place without a map. "I'm a Republican, and I don't always agree with you, but you were right to say what you said. I'm a mom in Michigan, and I want my kids to grow up in a country where telling the truth isn't dangerous. I never thought I'd write to a politician, but I saw you stand alone, and I couldn't stay quiet." Jasmine read as many as she could. She kept a box beside her desk labeled Voices. She said it reminded her who she was fighting for when the pressure got loud. And the pressure was loud. By the weekend, 2 Sunday political shows had invited her to appear. She declined both. "Not yet," she told Noel, waiting for the right moment. "No," she said, "I already had it. Now I want the right outcome." Because for Jasmine, this was no longer just about defending herself. It was about turning this spark into something durable. And the voices pouring into her office? That wasn't noise. That was fuel. Jasmine folded the letter slowly, pressing her thumb along the crease before slipping it into the voices box. "She reminded me of Barbara Jordan," she repeated softly. That name carried weight, legacy, clarity, courage. Jasmine didn't take it lightly. The atmosphere in her office had changed. Not louder, more focused. Saidi had started color tagging incoming messages by district and state. Noel built a dashboard to track which regions were reacting fastest. By Sunday, they could see the pattern. This wasn't partisan. It was personal. Americans weren't rallying behind Jasmine because she was a Democrat. They were rallying because she told the truth and refused to apologize for it. The turning point came Monday morning when a conservative strategist appeared on national TV and said, "I don't like her politics, but we're losing the narrative war because she owns hers." That same day, 2 swing district representatives, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, issued a joint statement affirming the right of any elected official to cite public records without intimidation. It was cautious, sure, but it was movement. Jasmine didn't celebrate. She sat with her team, clicked through constituent messages, and asked, "How do we keep this from being a moment? How do we make it a standard?" Noel looked up. "We start with the people who wrote to us." "You mean thank them?" "No," he said. "Organize them." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A week ago, they tried to silence her for quoting public records. Now, those same records were fueling calls for oversight. What had started as a smear was becoming a spark. The rally outside the studio wasn't just a protest, it was proof. Proof that people would show up for truth when it wasn't filtered through party lines or pundit panels. It was grassroots in the truest sense. Uncoordinated, unpaid, undeniable. Inside her office, Jasmine reviewed drafts of the proposed legislation. Her team had labeled it plainly, the Transparency Protection Act. It wasn't flashy, but that was the point. It didn't need spin. It needed teeth. If they're going to call reading a document an attack, Jasmine said, tapping her pen on the desk, they're going to make sure every American has the armor of access. Noel added, "We're not just defending transparency, we're weaponizing it the right way." With sunlight, Saidi was already drafting language to include protections for whistleblowers and independent watchdog groups. They knew the bill wouldn't pass easily. But that didn't matter, not yet. What mattered was that it existed. On paper, in the open, and that every attempt to kill it would be on the record. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, cracks in the opposition widened. A leaked email from a senior advisor inside the administration admitted that Jasmine's quiet refusal to take the bait had left them fighting a ghost with a megaphone. She wasn't everywhere, but her words were. And Washington was starting to realize, you can smear a person. You can't smear a principle without leaving stains on yourself. The tension wasn't gone, but it had changed shape. What once felt like a storm now felt like the calm just before the next one. Everyone was watching, waiting, wondering, what would Jasmine Crockett do next? She arrived early, her steps steady as ever, carrying a single folder under her arm. Inside it, a formal ethics complaint, not against Karoline Leavitt, though her name appeared more than once, but against the abuse of congressional processes to intimidate elected officials engaging in lawful, transparent speech. It was unprecedented. Most lawmakers shied away from filing complaints within their own chamber. It was seen as poking the beast. But Jasmine wasn't poking. She was documenting. And she filed the complaint not with a press release or cameras, but with quiet precision. By noon, the document was logged. By 1 p.m., it had leaked. The reaction was instant. Some called it brave. Others called it reckless. A few whispered that it would go nowhere, just another paper trail in a city littered with dead-end ethics cases. But those whispers didn't matter. What mattered was the precedent, that someone had drawn a line, that someone had said, this far, no further. And in doing so, Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend her name, she redefined the battlefield. Let the record show, she said later that evening to a reporter in the hallway, that when the truth came under attack, I didn't just speak, I filed it. 2. Independent oversight for misuse of law enforcement in political contexts. 3. Mandatory ethics training for congressional staff on the limits of power. The room was quiet, not out of doubt, but out of focus. Jasmine wasn't rallying applause. She was drawing a blueprint. Saidi leaned forward first, pen ready. You want us to draft this in-house or loop an outside counsel? In-house, Jasmine said. We'll bring in partners when we need to, but this has to start with us. People need to see that the ones who are targeted are the ones leading the fix. Noel gave a slow nod. So, we're not fighting fire with fire? We're fighting fire with policy, Jasmine said, without missing a beat. Because fire burns hot, but laws last longer. They spent the next 6 hours breaking into work groups. Some pulled case studies. Some compiled data on past retaliatory investigations. A couple of interns dug into whistleblower statutes dating back to the early 2000s. There was coffee, scribbled post-its, and someone ordered way too many sandwiches. But no one left the room. Outside, the narrative was still swirling. Cable news ran split screens. Jasmine's ethics filing on one side, a panel of pundits speculating her next move on the other. But they were missing it entirely. Because Jasmine wasn't just reacting anymore. She was designing the response. By the end of the week, her office quietly submitted the Transparency and Accountability Protection Act, TAPA for short. No fanfare, no podium. Just a carefully written piece of legislation, grounded in precedent and framed in language that both sides of the aisle would have to look twice at before opposing. And while D.C. debated whether it had teeth, regular people were already calling it something else. Jasmine's Law. By that evening, hashtag Jasmine's Law was trending. Not from campaign push, but from people who felt like for once a political storm had ended with something productive. TV hosts replayed the clip of her simple sidewalk statement on a loop, marveling at the lack of theatrics. Late-night segments called it the quietest mic drop in recent history. But Jasmine didn't log on to watch the praise. She was already in another late meeting, reviewing the bill's language one more time. This is going to get picked apart, Noel warned, highlighting a clause about public record indexing. I know, she replied. Let them pick. But they won't be able to say we didn't do the work. The next day, bipartisan lawmakers began requesting briefings on the proposal. Not because they all agreed, but because they couldn't afford not to engage. Public opinion was shifting, and Jasmine wasn't just writing it. She was steering it. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt remained out of the spotlight. Rumors swirled about internal fractures in her camp. Some staffers were reportedly considering resignations. Others were quietly reaching out to legal counsel. But the story had moved on, not away from accountability, but toward action. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real story all along. Not that someone told the truth, but that telling the truth finally did something. Not noise, not fire, just change. And just like that, Jasmine Crockett became more than a moment. She became a measure, not a power, not a defiance, but of what's possible when principle is louder than performance. She didn't chase a headline. She became a standard. In a country starved for authenticity, where every scandal becomes spectacle and every truth gets buried beneath noise, Jasmine chose something rare. She didn't break. She built. And while the world spun on, already reaching for the next controversy, those who were paying attention, really paying attention, saw the blueprint she left behind. Hold the line. Tell the truth. Do the work. Even when no one's clapping. Especially when no one's clapping. Because integrity doesn't ask for applause. It just shows up. Every time. When truth is inconvenient, some will try to bury it, twist it, or punish those who speak it. But when you stand in it, quietly, confidently, and with receipts, you don't just defend the truth. You shift the power. Jasmine Crockett didn't just survive a public smear. She transformed it into something lasting. A reminder that courage isn't always loud, but it always matters. If this story moved you, don't scroll past it. Share it. Talk about it. Demand better. Don't just watch from the sidelines. Show up, speak up, and stay informed. Because in the end, truth should be the last word.